Welcome to our last session this afternoon. Tomorrow we have 5, and on Sabbath we have 3. So we'll be struggling to try and finish what we really need to finish. The next several sessions, at least this one, plus 2 more tomorrow, we are going to be dealing with Revelation chapter 10, and right now with the little book of Daniel chapter 12 and verse 4. So let's go to page 221, and let's take a look at the little book of Daniel 12 and verse 4. Are you there? Yes. Raise your hand if you're there. All right, everybody's there. A review of the chiastic structure of Daniel 1 through 7 reveals that the book of Daniel is actually contains 2 books in one. The first book embraces Daniel 1 through 7, and the second book embraces Daniel chapter 8 through 12. Now, if you go to the next page, you have an illustration of how Daniel 1 through 7 is a book in itself. And I illustrate it with a candelabrum. You'll notice at the very top of the candelabrum you have Daniel 1, the introduction. That is the introduction to the entire book of Daniel. Then you'll notice that on the same branch below that you have Daniel 2 on one side and Daniel 7 on the other side. The reason they're on the same branch is because their theme is the same. In Daniel chapter 2, you have 4 metals. In Daniel 7, you have 4 beasts. Chain prophecies. That's why they're on the same branch of the candelabrum. Then Daniel 3 and Daniel 6 are also closely related, because both of them deal with stories that are very similar. In Daniel chapter 3, you have 3 young men that are thrown into a fiery furnace because they refuse to practice false worship. In Daniel chapter 6, you have Daniel thrown into a lion's den because he insisted on worshiping his God according to the dictates of his conscience. And then Daniel 4 and 5, you have a common theme as well, because in Daniel 4, you have the fall of Nebuchadnezzar for being arrogant, the king of Babylon. In Daniel chapter 5, you have the definitive fall of Belshazzar for his arrogance. So do you see the structure of the first half of Daniel, or the first book in Daniel? It's self-contained. Now, the first book then, just reviewing here at the bottom of page 222, you have in Daniel 7 a sequence of powers. We're going to go now to Daniel chapter 7. And these powers lead to the moment when the judgment begins. So let's review. We're not going to do this in detail. The lion represents what? Babylon, the bear, the Medes and Persians, the leopard, Greece, the dragon beast, Rome, the 10 horns, the divisions of Rome, the little horn, the papacy rules how long? 1260 years. When does that period of rule end? In 1798. And then you have something that very seldom is addressed in evangelism. And that is that after the deadly wound, or after the papacy ends its period of dominion, what do you have in Daniel 7? You have the judgment. And we're going to notice that the judgment has 3 stages. In other words, the book of Daniel presents the judgment in 3 stages, just like our trials in the United States today. First of all, you have the investigation of the evidence. Secondly, based on the evidence, you have the verdict. And in the third place, you have the giving of the reward, or the execution of the verdict that was uttered based on the investigation. Are you following me or not? Is that the way our system of jurisprudence works in the United States? Yes, you have a trial. Then based on the trial, you have a verdict. And then the verdict is implemented. So let's notice the note at the top of page 223. The sequence of powers indicates that the judgment would begin sometime after when? 1798. Why? Well, because the little horn ruled till 1798, and the next point is the judgment. So it has to be after 1798 because you have a chain of events here. The sequence of powers indicates that the judgment would begin sometime after 1798 and would conclude with Christ receiving the kingdom from his Father. Correct? No one before October 23, 1844 understood that the judgment would occur in three stages. Investigative in heaven, sentence or verdict in heaven, and the reward on earth. Before October 23, 1844, no one understood that. Because that was going to be understood when? When the little book was opened in the time of the end. Now, Daniel chapter 7 runs in 4 cycles. The first cycle is verses 9 and 10. The second cycle is verses 17 and 18. The third cycle is Daniel 7, 21 and 22. And the third cycle is Daniel 7, actually verses 25 through 27. Now let's pursue these 4 repetitive cycles in Daniel chapter 7. We'll begin at verse 9. The little horn has just done its work. And the next event is in verse 9. I watched till thrones were put in place. And the Ancient of Days, who is the Ancient of Days? God. Where does he live? So where is this taking place? In heaven. The Ancient of Days was seated. By the way, that means that before he was seated, he was not seated there. His garment was white as snow, and the hair of his head was like pure wool. His throne was a fiery flame, its wheels a burning fire. A fiery stream issued and came forth from before him. 1,000 thousands ministered to him, and 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. Who are those? Where do the angels live? So where is this taking place? Where is the judgment seating and the book opening, or the book's opening? In heaven. Then it says the court was seated where? And the books were open. What are the books open for? To examine the evidence, to do an investigation, an investigative judgment. Now, let's go to verses 13 and 14. This is a continuation of this scene. I was watching in the night visions, and behold, one like the Son of Man. Who is that? Jesus. Coming with the clouds of heaven. What are the clouds of heaven? The angels. So where is this taking place? In heaven. And he came to where? The Ancient of Days. Where? In heaven. And they brought him near before him. Who brought whom before whom? The angels, the clouds, brought the Son of Man before the Father who had seated to begin the judgment. And now, why does Jesus go there? Verse 14. Then to him, to whom? To Jesus, was given, by whom? By the Father, was given dominion and glory and a what? What did Jesus go to the Father for? To receive what? To receive dominion and glory and the kingdom. He goes in to receive the kingdom. It continues saying that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion which shall not pass away, and his kingdom the one which shall not be destroyed. Where does the investigation take place? Where does Jesus receive the kingdom? In heaven. Correct? He goes to the Ancient of Days to receive what? The kingdom. So the investigation takes place up there, and he receives the kingdom up there. The sentence to receive the kingdom is given up there. Now, let's go to verses 17 and 18. Now comes the interpretation. The vision in Daniel 7 is from verses 1 through 14. Then come 3 cycles that add explanations. Daniel wants to know what these beasts represent and what the kingdom is all about. So in verse 17, the angel comes back and says to him, those great beasts which are four kings or kingdoms which arise out of the earth. But the saints of the Most High shall receive what? The kingdom and possess the kingdom. Let me ask you, is the possessing of the kingdom when the verdict is actually implemented and the saints actually receive the kingdom? Absolutely. So, a short explanation is given here of the four beasts. Not in a lot of detail. The angel simply says, the four beasts are four kings or kingdoms. And after that, he says, the saints of the Most High will receive the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever, even forever and ever. Short explanation. Daniel isn't satisfied. He says, I need to know more, especially about the fourth beast and the judgment scene. And so in verse 21, we find these words. I was watching, and the same horn, see, he's going back to talk about the little horn period now. What period of history is this? From what date to what date? 538, 1798. Which trumpet? Fourth trumpet. So it says, I was watching as the same horn was making war against the saints and prevailing against them until when? Until the Ancient of Days came. Came to where? To the Father. Right? This is amplifying what we find before. Until the Ancient of Days came, and judgment was made what? In favor of the saints of the Most High. Where was the judgment in favor of the saints given? On earth or in heaven? In heaven. Until the Ancient of Days came, and a judgment was made in favor of the saints of the Most High. So let me ask you, is that the verdict? Of course it is. A judgment was made in favor of the saints of the Most High. Where is the verdict given? In heaven. But when is the verdict implemented? Let's continue reading. And the time came for the saints to possess the kingdom. Is that the implementation of the verdict? Do you see the three stages? Investigation, verdict, implementation of the verdict. So it says, and the time came for the saints to possess the kingdom. Daniel still wants to know more. So in verse 25, God, once again, the angel once again goes back to talk about the little horn. Verse 25. See, even Daniel runs in cycles. The little horn shall speak pompous words against the Most High, shall persecute the saints of the Most High, shall intend to change times and law, then the saints shall be given into his hand for a time and times and half a time. But then what's going to happen? But the court shall be seated where? We already noticed that that's in heaven. And what happens? The court is seated, and what is going to happen? And they shall take away his dominion. Where? In heaven. To consume and destroy it forever. Then the kingdom and the greatness of the kingdoms under the whole heaven shall be given to the people, the saints of the Most High. So who receives the kingdom first? Jesus. Who receives the kingdom then as an implementation of the verdict? The saints, with Jesus. So it says in verse 27, then the kingdom and dominion and the greatness of the kingdoms under the whole heaven shall be given to the people, the saints of the Most High. His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and all dominions shall serve and obey him. That is Jesus. Are you catching the picture? This could not be understood until October 23, 1844. The Millerites did not understand it. That's why they were greatly disappointed. Now, what does it mean for Jesus to receive the kingdom from his Father? What is his kingdom? His kingdom are his people. How does he determine who are his people? Well, he has to examine the cases of all who professed his name to see if they really are subjects of the kingdom. And when all of the cases are examined, and it's shown who is truly a member of his kingdom, then probation closes and Jesus comes to give the kingdom to his people. Are you following me or not? Yes. Now, let's read this statement from Ellen White. Very clear. Bottom of page 224. Every case had been decided for life or death. While Jesus had been ministering in the sanctuary, the what judgment? I put it in brackets, but we know it's the investigative judgment had been going on for whom? For the righteous dead, beginning with whom? With what person? Adam, right. And then for the righteous living. This is at the end of time, the sealing of the 144,000. Christ had received his what? His kingdom, having made the atonement for his people and blotted out their sins. The subjects of the kingdom were made up. So what is the kingdom? The subjects of the kingdom were made up. The marriage of the Lamb was consummated because when probation closes, Jesus marries the totality of his people. Read the material on the marriage. We're not going to be able to get there in this class. At the end of these study notes. Because you'll understand that each individual who receives Jesus truly, and is truly a child of God, is invited to the wedding. But the corporate totality is the bride. So the bride of Jesus at the end of time is all of the redeemed, his kingdom. But the individuals are invited to the wedding. It's a strange way of thinking, but that's the way that it is. And if you read the material, it'll become very, very clear. She continues, by the way, taking the kingdom and marrying his kingdom is the same thing. Two different ways of saying the same thing. So it says, the subjects of the kingdom were made up, the marriage of the Lamb was consummated, and the kingdom and the greatness of the kingdom under the whole heaven was given to whom? To Jesus. And to whom else? The heirs of salvation. Is that what Daniel 7 said? That the kingdom is given to Jesus and then to the heirs? Yes. And Jesus was to reign as King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Let me give you an illustration of what happens during the investigative judgment. I want you to imagine the time when the case of John Huss appears before the heavenly court. We don't know when that was. It's in chronological order according to when a person lived. So let me ask you, was the judgment against John Huss a travesty in justice? Yes. Was he innocent? Yes. And yet the innocent died, and those who were guilty lived. How much justice is there in that? There's no justice at all. Does God have to rectify that? A just God has to rectify that. So when the earthly court pronounced a wrong judgment against Huss and killed him, the little horn prevailed. It went well for him. The righteous die and the unrighteous live. So in the judgment in heaven, God says, John Huss, present yourself before my judgment seat. I'm dramatizing for effect. And so an angel brings John Huss's DVD, the record of his life. And the record of his life is examined. And the heavenly jury is aghast. The heavenly jury says, now wait a minute, something is wrong here. John Huss gave his life to Jesus. He was faithful. And yet a wrong judgment was given on earth. We need to rectify this. And so a judgment is proclaimed in favor of John Huss. Let me ask you, what is the focus here? Is the focus in Daniel 7 upon the little horn, the persecutions of the little horn, or is it focused on rectifying the earthly judgments, what the little horn did, so that God's people can eventually be saved in the kingdom? You know, it's a wrong question to say, is the center of Daniel 7 the little horn or the saints receiving the kingdom? Because in order for the saints that were trampled by the little horn to receive the kingdom, it's necessary for the heavenly court to rectify the situation. Is this making sense? This is a fundamental Seventh-day Adventist doctrine. Now let's go to page 225. The second book of the book of Daniel. The second book in the book is Daniel 8 through 12. Is Daniel 7 a book? Self-contained? Yes. It has You know, everything in a chiastic order. But the second book is the book that is mentioned in Daniel 12, verse 4. What does it say? But you, Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book until when? The time of the end. Was the book going to be sealed forever? No, the book would be sealed in the times of Daniel, and it would be opened when? In the time of the end. Many shall run to and fro. When will they run to and fro? In the time of the end. And knowledge shall increase, which means that there's going to be airplanes and automobiles and locomotives and nuclear weapons and electric toothbrushes. That's not what it's saying. Knowledge of what will increase? Knowledge of what's in the little book, because the little book has been opened. That's much more powerful in evangelism when we show people that that's exactly what happened leading up to 1844. People were interested in Daniel 8 through 12. The second book in Daniel was closed and sealed in the days of the prophet, around 538 BC, to be opened in the time of the end, 1798. This verse has nothing to do with the increase of science and technology. When God removes the seal from the book at the end of time, the people will run to and fro, seeking an increased knowledge of the contents of the book. This is the way that Ellen White invariably understood the expression, knowledge shall be increased. She never refers to that as an increase of technology. You know, Amos 8, 1, 11, and 12 uses the same idiom. Notice Amos 8, 11, and 12. Behold, the days are coming, says the Lord, that I will send a famine on the land. Not a famine of bread, nor a thirst for water, but of hearing the words of the Lord. They shall wander from sea to sea, and from north to east. They shall run to and fro. That's the exact expression. Well, many will run to and fro, that we find in Daniel 12, verse 4. But what are people running to find? Many shall, they say, they shall run to and fro, seeking what? The word of the Lord, but shall not find it. So the portion, listen carefully, the portion of Daniel that was sealed is not the total book. It is Daniel 8 through 12, and not even all of Daniel 8 through 12. The portion that has to do with the 2,300 days and the beginning of the investigative judgment in 1844. That was sealed and could not be understood until the day after. Now, you say, where do you get that from? What proof do we have of that? Well, let's examine 5 proofs. The Bible says in the voice of 1 or 2 or 3 witnesses. So let's give 5, just in case. The book of Daniel contains 2 different languages. Chapter 1 is the introduction to the entire book. It is in Hebrew. But chapters 2 through 7 are in Aramaic. And chapters 8 through 12 are in Hebrew. Does that seem to mark a distinction between the first half of the book and the second half of the book? The change in language? Absolutely. That's one evidence that you're dealing with 2 books within a book. Reason number 2. There is clear evidence that most of Daniel 1 through 7, with the exception of the judgment scene in Daniel 7, was understood long before the time of the end. The church father Hippolytus, who wrote in the 3rd century AD, understood the sequence of powers in Daniel 7. So was Daniel 7 in its totality sealed until the time of the end? No, Hippolytus in the 3rd century understood it, just like Adventists. Let's read it. In speaking of a lioness from the sea, Daniel meant the rising of the kingdom of Babylon, and that this was the golden head of the image. Then after the lioness, he sees a second beast like a bear, which signified the Persians. For after the Babylonians, the Persians obtained the power. And in saying that it had 3 ribs in its mouth, he pointed to 3 nations, Persians, Medes, and Babylonians, which were expressed in the image by the silver after the gold. Then comes a third beast, a leopard, which means the Greeks. For after the Persians, Alexander of Macedon had the power when Darius was overthrown, which was also indicated by the brass in the image. And in saying that the beast had 4 wings of a fowl and 4 heads, he showed most clearly how the kingdom of Alexander was parted in 4 divisions. Are we doing well? Yeah. Sounds like an Adventist, doesn't he? For in speaking of four heads, he meant the four kings that arose out of it. For Alexander, when dying, divided his kingdom into four parts. And then it continues saying, then he says, the fourth beast was dreadful and terrible. It had iron teeth and claws of brass. Who then are meant by this but the Romans, whose kingdom, the kingdom that still stands, is expressed by the iron, for says he, its legs are of iron. Did he understand the four beasts of Daniel chapter 7? So was that sealed till the time of the end? No. But you say, did he understand about the little horn and the 10 horns? Well, we have another quotation by him. It's at the bottom of page 226. Let us look at what is before us more carefully and scan it, as it were, with open eye. The golden head of the image is identical with the lioness by which the Babylonians were represented. The golden shoulders and arms of silver are the same with the bear, by which the Persians and Medes are meant. The belly and thighs of brass are the leopard, by which the Greeks who ruled from Alexander onwards are intended. The legs of iron are the dreadful and terrible beast, by which the Romans who hold the empire now are meant. The toes of clay and iron are the 10 horns which are to be, because that hadn't happened yet. The one other little horn springing up in their midst is the Antichrist. Now there's one thing that Hippolytus did not understand. What is it that he did not understand? Let's finish reading the statement. The stone that smites the image and breaks it in pieces, and that filled the whole earth, is Christ, who comes from heaven and brings judgment on the world. Is that correct? So Jesus comes to this earth to judge. No. Did he understand that there was going to be a heavenly judgment before Jesus came in judgment to this world? Absolutely. So he understood everything in Daniel 7 except the judgment in heaven. Now, the evidence from these quotations indicates that Hippolytus understood everything about Daniel 7, except one vitally important detail: the investigative pre-Advent judgment in heaven before the second coming. According to the understanding of Hippolytus, the judgment would take place when Jesus comes from heaven to earth to judge the world and establish his everlasting kingdom. Is that what the Millerites believed before 1840, before October 22? Absolutely. However, as we have already noted, in the investigative judgment, the verdict takes place where? In heaven, before Jesus returns to the earth. We should note that people could understand some portions of Daniel that found their fulfillment before the time of the end. For example, could people understand the historical sections of Daniel 1 through 6 before the time of the end? Could they understand the arrival of Babylon and his Daniel and his friends in Babylon and so on, chapter 1? Could they understand to a great degree what's in Daniel 2? Could he understand the 3 young men that were thrown into the fiery furnace? Could they understand the case of Nebuchadnezzar going insane for 7 years? Could they understand the fall of Babylon and Belshazzar? Could they understand Daniel thrown in the lion's den? Yes, and the majority of Daniel chapter 7, with the exception of the investigative judgment in heaven. Incidentally, parts of Daniel 8 through 12 could also be understood. Could people understand the 70 weeks before October 22, 1844? Yes, many people understood the 70 weeks because that had already been fulfilled in Christ. Could people understand the ram and the he-goat of Daniel chapter 8? Sure. You don't need to be a rocket scientist. It says that the ram represents the Medes and Persians and that the he-goat represents Greece. And that the horn, the noble horn, is the first king, and the 4 horns represent the divisions of the kingdom of that first king. So that could be understood. You know, there was once a debate between 2 individuals, a church father by the name of Tertullian and a pagan philosopher called Porphyry. And Porphyry said to Tertullian, he said, listen, Daniel chapter 11 could not have been written in the 6th century by Daniel. It had to be written in the intertestamental period, right before the coming of Christ, because the details about the history of Rome and Greece is so precise that nobody could have predicted it beforehand. So very clearly, could the first portions of Daniel 11 be understood? Absolutely, they could be understood. But there was one thing that could not be understood, and that is that there would be an investigative judgment in heaven before the coming of Jesus, for Jesus to examine the cases of those who professed His name, to establish His kingdom, the members of His kingdom, and then He would give the kingdom to His people. So, reason number 2 why the entire book of Daniel was not sealed is because many portions of Daniel could be understood before the time of the end. The first reason is that Daniel is in 2 languages, which indicates that the book is divided into 2 parts. There's a third reason, Ellen White. How did she know that the book that was sealed is only a part of Daniel? You know, many scholars say, well, it's Daniel. No, she didn't make that mistake. Let's read some quotations here. They were on page 228. I'm going to read just a few of these statements because time flies by. In the Revelation, all the books of the Bible meet an end. Here is the complement of the book of Daniel. One is a prophecy, the other a revelation. The book that was sealed is not the revelation, but that portion. What is a portion? A part. But that portion of the prophecy of Daniel relating to what? To the last days. The angel commanded, but thou, O Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book even to the time of the end. So what is it that is sealed? A portion of the book having to do with what? With the last days. Notice the next statement. Great Controversy 355. The message of salvation has been preached in all ages. But this message, she's referring to the first angel's message, the hour of his judgment is come. But this message is a part of the gospel which could be proclaimed only in the last days. Why could the first angel's message only be preached in the last days? Because before that, the hour of his judgment had not come. For only then would it be true that the hour of judgment had come. The prophecies present a succession of events. This is Daniel 7, right? Lion, bear, leopard, dragon, 10 horns, little horn. That's a succession that she's talking about. The prophecies present a succession of events leading down to the opening of the judgment. Is that Daniel 7? Is the opening of the judgment the final stage? Yes. This is especially true of the book of Daniel. Now here comes the key portion. However, that part of his prophecy that related to the last days. That what? Part. Daniel was bidden to close up and seal to the time of the end. Is all of Daniel sealed to the time of the end? No. She says, she wrote, not till we reach this time could a message concerning the judgment be proclaimed based on the fulfillment of these prophecies. However, at the time of the end, says the prophet, many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall be what? Increased. Now let's skip the next quotation and go to the one from Manuscript Releases. This is very interesting. The unsealing of the little book, what is the little book? The book that was what? Sealed until the time of the end. The unsealing of the little book was the message in relation to time. Which time? The 2300-day prophecy. So what is the part that is sealed? That which has to do with the 2300-day prophecy. So she explicitly says the unsealing of the little book was the message in relation to time. Now, let's read the last statement. I hate to pass it up. You know, time flies so by so fast, but this is just a powerful statement. Honored by men with the responsibilities of state and with the secrets of kingdoms bearing universal sway, Daniel was honored by God as his ambassador and was given many revelations of the mysteries of ages to come. His wonderful prophecies, as recorded by him in chapters 7 to 12 of the book bearing his name, were not fully understood even by the prophet himself. But before his life labors closed, he was given the blessed assurance that at the end of the days, in the closing period of this world's history, he would again be permitted to stand in his lot and place. By the way, this is not in person, but through the unsealing of the book that he wrote. It was not given him to understand all that God had revealed of the divine purpose. Shut up the words and seal the book, he was directed concerning his prophetic writings. These were to be sealed even to the time of the end. Go thy way, Daniel, the angel once more directed the faithful messenger of Jehovah, for the words are closed up and sealed till the time of the end. Go thou thy way till the end be, for thou shalt rest and stand in thy lot at the end of the days. So what is the aspect that was not understood, particularly by Daniel? It was the event that had to do with time, the prophecy of the 2300 days. So are you understanding reason number 3? Now let's go to reason number 4. The internal evidence of Daniel 8 through 12 proves beyond any doubt that these chapters compose the little book sealed until the time of the end. In other words, when you examine the chapters themselves, you discover this. These chapters have a central theme that bonds them together. The 2300 days and the beginning date for the heavenly investigative judgment. That's a central theme of Daniel 8 through 12. Let us consider the content of these chapters one by one to see how they relate to the 2300 days and the heavenly judgment. So we'll go quickly. Daniel 8. You should have this memorized because it was a Sabbath school lesson last Sabbath. The vision in this chapter describes the historical chain of events that precede the beginning of the investigative judgment. What do we have first in Daniel 8? A ram with 2 horns. What does that represent? Medo-Persia. Then you have a he-goat. What kingdom? Greece. Then you have a notable horn on the head of the he-goat. What is that? It is the first king, Alexander the Great. Then 4 horns come out of the head of the scapegoat after the great horn is broken. That is the 4 divisions of what? Of the Grecian Empire. Then you have a little horn that first extends how? Geographically, horizontally, and then morphs into a system that challenges the God of heaven, tramples the saints, and messes with the sanctuary. And then, when Daniel 8 ends, the vision itself ends with 2 heavenly messengers speaking, and one heavenly messenger asks, until when will this vision be? The totality of the vision. And what is the answer of the other? Until 2,300 days, the sanctuary shall be what? Shall be cleansed. Now, I want you to notice something very important here. The vision covers what? The question is, until when is the vision? The vision covers from Medo-Persia to what? To the cleansing of the sanctuary, right? Now remember that, because we're going to come back to that. The vision, until when the vision, is the same word vision that is used early in the chapter to describe Medo-Persia, Greece, the first king, the 4th king, the little horn geographically, and the little horn vertically. So this covers the entire vision that has been given in Daniel chapter 8. And then the interesting thing is that Gabriel comes and he tries to explain to Daniel particularly the time element of this prophecy. And what happens with Daniel? He just can't get it. The chapter ends by saying, I didn't understand. But do you know what he didn't understand? There's 2 words for vision in Daniel 8. Unless you're able to go to the Hebrew, you would never know it. The first is the word shazon, which describes the entire vision, from Medo-Persia all the way till the cleansing of the sanctuary. The second word is mare, and the word mare applies only to the 2,300 days of the vision. It's specialized in that particular point. And at the end of Daniel 8, Daniel doesn't say, I didn't understand the chazon. Daniel says, I did not understand the mare. I did not understand the 2,300 days. So in Daniel 8, Daniel gets sick, And Gabriel was not able to finish the explanation. Did Gabriel give an explanation of when the 2300 days begin in Daniel 8? No. Did he explain when they end? No. He just said 2,300 days. So now Daniel is confused because God had said that Israel was going to be captive for 70 years. Then they would go back and they would reestablish their temple and they would build the walls. They would establish their religion. And now he says 2,300 years. That means then that probably we were so sinful that God has decided that he's going to extend the period from 70 years to 2,300 years. So in Daniel chapter 9, the very next chapter, the chapter begins and Daniel is studying the prophecy of the 70 years. Why is he studying the prophecy of the 70 years? Well, because he can't make sense out of 70 years versus 2,300 years. And then after it says that he's studying the 70 years, then the text tells us that Daniel begins a prayer. We've sinned. We're wicked. We deserve exactly what we got. We broke the covenant. But then when he gets to verse 19 in chapter 8, chapter 9, he says, don't delay. That's an important word. He's saying to God, don't delay. Don't delay what? Don't delay in fulfilling your prophecy of 70 years of captivity. And then Gabriel comes back at the end of Daniel's prayer, and what does he give Daniel? An explanation of what? The 70 weeks. From the going forth of the command to restore and build Jerusalem. Basically, I'm going to summarize, there's going to be a period of what? 70 weeks, allotted for the Jewish nation, which is 490 years. The 490 years are the first part of which prophecy? The first part of the prophecy of the 2300 days, and it gives us the what? The starting point. So is Daniel 9 related to the 2300 days? Yes, gives us the starting point. Does it also give us the ending point? Of course, if you know the starting point, and you know it's 2,300 years, you're going to know when they end. So the 70 weeks are the first part. It gives us a starting point for the prophecy that was given in Daniel chapter 8. Are you with me so far? Then in Daniel chapter 10, we have an interesting battle. That's the lesson for this week. By the way, it is a very important chapter. Have you ever heard a sermon in Daniel 10? It's not one of the chapters that we study, but it is crucially important. There's an entire chapter in these study notes on Daniel chapter 10, which you need to take a look at. But now I can only give you a synthesis of how it's related to the 2300 days. Now let me ask you, in order for the 2300-day prophecy to be fulfilled, was it necessary for Israel to go back to their land to rebuild the temple? Of course. But in order for them to go back to their land to rebuild the temple, the Medo-Persian king needed to give a what? A decree. So there are two individuals struggling with Cyrus. One is called the Prince of Persia, and the other one is called Michael. Actually, it's Gabriel first, and then Michael. And they're struggling. What are they struggling about? They're struggling with the mind of Cyrus for Cyrus to give the decree for God's people to go back and to rebuild the temple, and then ultimate decrees will give them permission also to establish the theocracy so that the prophecy of the 70 weeks can begin on time. You think Satan was able to interpret the prophecy of the 70 weeks and the 2300 days? Why do you suppose the devil rose up so many counterfeit movements around 1844? Marxism, evolutionism, the Baha'i, the Jehovah's Witnesses, the Mormons, spiritualism. You name it. One after another. Because the devil knew that God was going to raise up a true movement. And he wanted to confuse the minds of people. Are you following me or not? And so we find in Daniel chapter 10 this battle. Is Daniel 10 related somehow to the 2300 days? Of course, the decree has to be given so that the 2300 days can begin on time. Let me read this statement from Ellen White. It's in your manual here. Let me see if I can find it. It's on page 232. It's a little bit later on in what we're going to talk about. It says, while Satan was striving to influence the highest powers in the kingdom of Medo-Persia to show disfavor for God's people, angels worked in behalf of the exiles. The controversy was one in which all heaven was interested. Through the prophet Daniel, we are given a glimpse of this mighty struggle between the forces of good and the forces of evil. For 3 weeks, Gabriel wrestled with the powers of darkness, seeking to counteract the influences at work on the mind of whom? Of Cyrus. Do you know that there was opposition when they were going to rebuild the temple? Opposition from that point all the way down to the building of the wall. Why? Because Satan knew that everything had to be restored in order for the 70 weeks to begin and the 2300 days to be fulfilled. So was Gabriel successful in fighting against the prince of Persia and his hosts? Not by himself. Because it says, and before the contest closed, Christ himself came to Gabriel's aid. Did Cyrus give the decree? Yes. Which would ultimately lead to the decree of the 2300 days. How important is Daniel chapter 10? It's crucially important. Does it have anything to do with the 2300 day prophecy? Of course it does. Now, unfortunately, our time has flown by. So I'm going to have to go here to Daniel 11, and we'll have to go through this very quickly. We've noticed that Daniel 8 has to do, what is the central theme of Daniel 8? The 2300 days. What is the central theme of Daniel 9? The beginning date for the 2300 days. What's the central theme of Daniel 10? The struggle for Israel to be reestablished so that the 2300 days can begin on time with the 70 weeks. What about Daniel 11? Do you know there's no new vision in Daniel 11? There's no new vision. There's just an explanation. An explanation of what? Of Daniel 8. Are you with me? So now Gabriel's going to say, okay, Daniel, now I've explained the beginning date and the struggle so that the decree could be given. Now I'm going to take you back to where I started Daniel 8. And we're going to go in the course of history, but instead of ending in 1844, I'm going to take you all the way to the close of probation and the setting up of the everlasting kingdom. And so let's notice this. Are you following me? It's amazing. Let's go to page 232. In chapter 11, Gabriel will complete the explanation that he suspended in Daniel 8. It is important to underline that there is no new vision in this chapter, only an explanation. What would it be an explanation of? Well, it's Daniel 8. It's going to become very clear. This indicates that Daniel 11 is the explanation of the vision of Daniel 8, because there is no other vision between chapter 8 and chapter 11. Gabriel will begin the explanation of the vision of Daniel 8 at the same starting point. And if you read Daniel 11, what kingdom does Daniel 11 begin with? Persia. What kingdom does it continue with? They're given by name, Greece. Does it mention the first king in Daniel 11? That's a notable horn. Does it then mention the 4 divisions of Alexander's kingdom? Is he starting where he started Daniel 8? Absolutely. Then the chapter describes the dominion of pagan Rome through verse 30. Then it describes from verse 31 through verse 39 papal Rome. Then when you get to Daniel 11, verse 40, you have a mention of the deadly wound. Remember we looked at the king of the south, which represents France, attacking whom? The king of the north. So is this taking you to 1798 and to the French Revolution? Absolutely. But the vision takes us well beyond the 1260 years of papal oppression to the final persecution of God's people when the king of the north's wound is healed. Have you noticed in Daniel 11, after it says that the king of the south attacks the king of the north, that suddenly the king of the north overwhelms everything? So, is the deadly wound given to the king of, by the king of the south to the king of the north the last end of the story? No, because then the king of the north goes out and conquers everything. We're on page 233. When the king of the north goes out to destroy and annihilate God's people and sets up in a strategic point to deliver a final death blow, what happens? Michael stands up. Do you know what that is? That's the end of the judgment that began in 1844. It's the close of probation, when Jesus changes his garments from his high priestly garments to his garments of vengeance. So does Daniel 11 take us far beyond 1844? The beginning of the judgment. Yeah, if Daniel hadn't gotten sick, probably Gabriel would have given him everything. But he got sick, so Gabriel had to wait to explain. So Michael standing up represents the close of human probation. You say, how do we know that? Because the same expression, stand up, is used in verses 2 and 3, and it refers to kings beginning to reign. And when will Jesus begin to reign? When his kingdom is made up. And when will his kingdom be made up? When the investigative judgment ends. Now we continue. The vision of Daniel 8 only explained the prophetic chain from the kingdom of Persia to the beginning of the judgment at the end of the 2300 days. The explanation of Daniel 11 begins at the same starting point as Daniel 8, but takes us beyond the beginning of the judgment to at the conclusion of the 2300 days to the close of the investigative judgment when Michael stands up. After Michael stands up, what's going to happen? Daniel 12 verse 1 says, Michael will stand up. Probation will close. What's going to happen after that? Oh, it says God's people will go through what? To the worst time of trouble in history. But at the moment when it appears like the king of the north is going to annihilate them, what's going to happen? At the end of the time of trouble, God will what? Deliver his people from the wrath of the king of the north. That is, all whose names were retained in the book. Let's go to Daniel 12, verse 1. This is really interesting. Daniel chapter 12 and verse 1 has several elements. Daniel 12, verse 1. Let's go actually to verse 44. It says here, when the king of the north is overwhelming everything, according to the previous verses, but news from the east and the north shall trouble him. So there's got to be news from the east and the north that is going to trouble the king of the north, who has overwhelmed everything. What comes from the east? The angel that seals comes from the rising sun. And the north is where? Up. Revelation 18 speaks about an angel that descends from heaven. The whole world is filled with his glory. Is that going to really alarm the papacy? Absolutely. And what is he going to do as a result? Therefore, he shall go out with great fury to destroy and annihilate many. But when he goes out to annihilate many, what happens? Verse 1 of chapter 12. At that time, Michael shall stand up. What does that mean, Michael shall stand up? Probation closes. Is that the end of the story? No. It says the great prince who stands watch over the sons of your people. And then what comes? There shall be a time of trouble such as never was since there was a nation. So is there a period after the close of probation before Jesus comes to give the kingdom to his people? Yes. And it says, and at that time, your people shall be what? Delivered. And here's an important detail. Everyone who is found written in the book. Amen. How is it determined who will be written in the book? What determined who would be written in the book? The investigative judgment. People say, well, the investigative judgment, that was Ellen White's invention. was not Ellen White's invention. It's all over the Bible. But notice that not only does Gabriel take Daniel to the close of the wrath of the king of the north, of the papacy, setting up in a strategic place to deliver a death blow, the loud cry of the fourth angel, and the sealing, and the close of probation, and the time of trouble, and the deliverance of God's people. It goes even beyond. And many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake. This is what is called the special resurrection. Don't have time to get into that. And many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, and some to shame and everlasting contempt. Those who pierced Jesus will resurrect in that special resurrection. And those who died in the faith of the third angel's message will resurrect during that period. It doesn't end there, though. It ends with the everlasting kingdom. It says, those who are wise shall shine like the brightness of the firmament, and those who turn many to righteousness like the stars, what? Like the stars forever and ever. Are you following me? Now, there's a fifth reason. The internal evidence shows us that really Daniel 8 through 12 has a central theme, right? We notice chapter 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12 through 12 and verse 3. Now, let me ask you this. If Daniel 12 verse 4 says that the book is sealed until the time of the end, would you expect there to be some place in the Bible where it talks about that book being opened? And that the book has to do with the judgment? And the judgment hour message is going to cause a disappointment? But after that, it has to be preached that the temple has to be measured? Hello? Would you expect another place in the Bible to describe the moment when the book opens?
Yes.
Do we have such a passage in Scripture? Yes. Where is it? In Revelation chapter 10. A powerful angel descends from heaven with an open book in his hand. And the entire chapter has to do with the judgment. And so, tomorrow in our first session, we will study about the opening of the little book that was sealed. So as I always say, don't miss the next exciting episode.